You know, that quote? It just perfectly captures the raw, unsettling, and, let's face it, fascinating world we're about to dive into. A world that's governed by rules that are almost never spoken out loud, but are always, always in play. Hello to all viewers of my channel. In this explainer, we are going to decode the dark arts of manipulation and power. We're going to pull back the curtain on the psychological tactics that shape our lives, from the boardroom all the way to our personal relationships, and probably most importantly, we are going to learn how to build a solid defense against them. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to face the reality of power dynamics head on. Then, we'll get inside the minds of manipulators to really understand their playbook and the triggers they love to use. After that, we get practical. We're going to build your defensive shield and figure out how to manage the emotional fallout. And finally, we'll wrap up by thinking about the ethics of it all. Okay, let's kick things off with the big idea, the core concept that really underpins everything else we're going to talk about today. This right here is the central and maybe kind of unsettling argument from Robert Greene's work. It's this idea that every single interaction, whether it's a huge business deal or just a simple family dinner, is this subtle dance for influence. And in this game, you're either a player or you're a pawn. Our goal today is to make sure you're a conscious player, not an unwitting pawn. So to understand the game, we've got to understand the players, right? What are the psychological blueprints that actually drive manipulative behavior? Let's take a look. Okay, this term, Machiavellianism, it gets thrown around a lot. But what does it really mean? Well, at its core, it's a worldview where the ends always justify the means. It's defined by this cynical view of other people and a really detached, strategic approach to using them to get what you want. It's less about being openly aggressive and much more about quiet, cunning calculation. But here's the thing, Machiavellianism rarely travels alone. Psychologists actually group it with two other toxic traits in what they call the Dark Triad. So you've got narcissism with that huge sense of self-importance and a bottomless need for admiration. Then you have psychopathy, which is characterized by a really shocking lack of remorse and empathy. You put them all together, and they form this really dangerous cocktail of personality traits that can cause a ton of harm. And this, of course, brings us to the book that famously laid out all these dynamics. See, Robert Greene isn't a psychologist. He's a student of history. He spent years studying everyone from Machiavelli and Sun Tzu to Henry Kissinger, and he synthesized their strategies, the very strategies often used by people with Dark Triad traits, into this modern-day playbook on power. And I mean, just look at some of these laws. They're immoral, they're ruthless, and they are brutally direct. Never outshine the master. That's all about managing the fragile egos of people above you. Crush your enemy totally. That's a warning against taking half measures that just give your rivals a chance to recover and come back for revenge. This book isn't trying to be a moral guide. It's an unflinching look at how power has actually worked throughout all of human history. So, we've seen the mindset, we've seen the playbook, but how do these strategies actually work on us? How do they pull the strings? Let's get into the psychological mechanics of influence. Well, this is where the work of psychologist Robert Cialdini comes in. He identified 6 universal shortcuts that our brains use to make decisions. And wouldn't you know it, these are the very triggers that manipulators love to exploit. Reciprocity, that powerful urge you feel to return a favor. Social proof, our instinct to just follow what the crowd is doing. Authority, our tendency to defer to experts. And scarcity, our deep desire for things that are rare. These aren't personal weaknesses, they're just built-in features of human psychology that, unfortunately, can be turned against us. This quote from a Reddit user just absolutely nails the commitment and consistency principle. It's often called the foot-in-the-door technique. Once we say yes to something small, our brain desperately wants to stay consistent with that decision. So when a bigger request comes along later, it feels really psychologically uncomfortable to say no. It's a subtle but, wow, an incredibly powerful way to build compliance, one little step at a time. Okay, we have seen the playbook. We know the psychological buttons they push. Now for the most important part. How do we actually defend ourselves? This section is all about taking back control. This is the big question, isn't it? Especially when you can't just walk away. I'm thinking of a difficult coworker or maybe even a family member. Confronting them directly often just adds more fuel to the fire. So, what's a smarter, more strategic approach? Yeah, this is where a technique called the gray rock method comes in. And the name, it tells you everything you need to know. The strategy is to make yourself as boring and uninteresting as a plain old gray rock.
See, manipulative people, especially those high in narcissism, they feed on emotional reactions. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad. The whole point here is to cut off their supply.
So what does this actually look like in practice? Well, first, you detach emotionally. You just refuse to give them the anger, the frustration, or even the joy they're trying to provoke. You keep all your answers short and noncommittal. Yes, no, I see. And this one is crucial. You avoid sharing any personal information. You basically become a conversational black hole, giving them absolutely nothing to grab onto.
And believe it or not, there's real science behind this. It's not just about being difficult. It's a principle from behavioral psychology called extinction. The idea is that if a behavior, like them trying to get a reaction out of you, is never, ever reinforced, it will eventually stop. The manipulator just gets bored and moves on to find an easier target. You're essentially training them that you are no longer a source of their emotional supply. But look, disengaging on the outside, building that wall, that's only half the battle. The other half is the one that's fought inside your own mind. So, how do you handle the stress and the anxiety that these encounters always leave behind? Because let's be real, even when you use the gray rock method perfectly, you can still walk away feeling tense, angry, or just completely shaken. You've protected yourself on the outside, but you also need a tool for some internal first aid. A really powerful tool for exactly this is the RAIN technique. It's a mindfulness practice, and the name is an acronym that gives you a structured way to process difficult emotions instead of just being overwhelmed by them. It's like becoming your own emotional first responder. Here's how simple and powerful it is. First, R is for recognize what you're feeling. Just name it. Okay, this is anxiety. This is anger. Second, A is for allow. Let the feeling be there without fighting it. Third, I is for investigate with a gentle curiosity. Where do you feel this in your body? What does it feel like? And finally, N is for nurture. Offer yourself a little bit of self-compassion. It's that simple, and this process can totally transform your relationship with your own difficult emotions. Okay, so we've covered the tactics, the psychology, and the defenses. Now for the final piece. Let's zoom out and think about the bigger picture. What are we supposed to do with all this knowledge? This slide really shows the two paths you can take. On one side, you have manipulation, using these tools to control other people for your own personal gain. But on the other side, you have awareness, using this exact same knowledge defensively to protect your own well-being and your autonomy. The goal isn't to become a master manipulator, it's to become impossible to manipulate. At the end of the day, knowing the rules of the power game doesn't force you to play dirty. It empowers you to play consciously. It allows you to see the entire board, to understand the moves being made, and to make your own choices. It's about choosing to be a player, not a pawn. And so the real power lies in asking yourself, which principles will you choose to live by? Subscribe to the channel and like, and also suggest your topics for future videos in the comments.